Welcome back. Today is the Bible study for Wednesday, May 6th. I'd just like to say a very happy anniversary to my awesome wife, Marcy. We were married 20 years ago on May 6, 2000. So this Bible study is pre-recorded, so just know that I'm going to be spending Wednesday with her, and can't do a lot of things. Some of what we'd planned on doing, what we'd hoped to do for our anniversary, well, that all went out the window. But I just like to say a very special happy anniversary to my wife. Thank you for all that you've done for me over these 20 years, for your love, your constant support. You've always been my biggest advocate, so thank you, Marcy. Love you very much, and happy anniversary. And now for us, as we continue our Bible study, we take up in chapter 6 of Matthew, beginning with verse 22. So 6:22. Let us pray. Lord, again, open our eyes, our hearts, our mind to what you would have us to read, hear, say. Speak to us through the strength of your Spirit, I pray, in Christ's name. Amen. Hey, so Jesus, again, yesterday we talked about where your treasure is, where your heart is. Now Jesus talks about some other things that go on with us internally, namely what we take in to ourselves affects our inner being. We know that it works that way when we eat. If your diet was nothing but donuts, that would have adverse effect on your health, and it wouldn't be healthy. It may be a lot of fun in the short run, but it would have devastating consequences in the long run. Well, similar things happen with our spiritual well-being. What we take in affects our spirit, our soul, our hearts. What we receive makes us who we are. And Jesus cautions us about that in this. So I'm going to read that, what he has to say. 6:22 and following. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? So again, Jesus isn't talking necessarily about sight, although what we see does have a part to play in this. It's interesting. Studies show that watching pornography will actually cause circuits in your brain to be rewired. That's one of the reasons why it's a dangerous thing. It changes endorphins, it changes all kinds of things, which is why it's such a problem, especially in a day and age when there's so much availability. Could you imagine what your life would look like if that's how you spent all of your day, or even part of your day every day? Which, again, is a huge problem. So what you see, what you take in, has a lot to do with what the shape and condition of your inner being, of your soul, so to speak. There's another way of thinking about this, is where you look is where you'll go. Remember several years ago, I was watching, and again, I have a penchant for some types of reality TV, especially if it's set in Alaska. I'll watch just about anything that's set in Alaska because I love seeing all the outdoors. And there was an episode of this young lady who's learning how to fly. Now, a small airplane. Now, if you're in Alaska, being able to fly a bush plane is extremely important. It's basically like a taxi. There's some places you just can't reach unless you have an aircraft. And so it's a highly sought after skill, a desirable skill. And in some ways, for some people, it's not a whole lot different than when you got your driver's license. So this young lady's learning how to fly, and she's progressing through her training. Towards the end of it, the instructor tells her this. He says, okay, we're going to drop into this river canyon. And the river, I don't know, it was a fairly wide river, but by our standards, but not huge by Alaskan standards. It was, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 feet wide. The wingspan on the airplane's about 20 feet wide or so. Pretty small plane. And he says, now we're going to drop down and you're going to fly through this canyon. And which means that as you get down close to the level of the river, you're going to have trees on each side of your wings. And he said to her, it's very important that you do not look at the trees. Look at where you want to go, because where you look is where you go. And that struck me as a life lesson and a spiritual lesson. So much of that is true. Where you look is where you're going to go. If she had drawn her attention to the trees, she would have invariably drifted over there. The same way it goes when you're driving. That's why we have issues with distracted driving. That's why cell phones kill a lot of people, because people are looking at their phone and not looking at where they're going. Again, where you look is where you go. And I think about how many of us spend our time doing this, right? There's my cell phone, just like this. How much of your day is spent like this? Where you look is where you go. And so this matters. What do you take in? I still remember as a kid that there was a total of about an hour of news on a day. There'd be the local news at 6, and then Walter Cronkite, which we only got CBS, would come on at 6:30. And that would be local news, national news. A grand total of about an hour of news. With commercial breaks, what are you talking about? 40 some minutes? Now think about the news cycle. It's 24 hours a day, and so much of the news, and doesn't matter which network is your choice, so much of it is just pure opinion, not actual reporting. And all that's meant to get your attention. It's meant to draw you in. It's meant to keep eyeballs to the screens so that they can sell more advertising, so they can make more money. But what it's doing is part of the division we have in our country is because we've bought into these different news agencies. Whether you're on the right or on the left, they both are doing similar things. They have similar tactics to shape the narrative how they want to keep you glued to it, to keep you enraged so that you keep on watching. And it works. They get great numbers and they make a lot of money. But where you look is where you go. I'm not saying don't pay attention to what goes on in the world. We have to. But do it in a responsible way is what I seek to do. Especially during this time, I've had to limit how much I watch the news, because if I watch too much of it, I just find myself too wrapped up in that anxiety. But so what helps me is to focus on the bigger picture, which is God's grace and love and care and mercy. I was really blessed by God last week. This website called Ministry Manners sent out a free book by N.T. Wright about the resurrection, about the Christian's understanding of resurrection. It was about 18 pages, so it wasn't really a book. It was more like an extended paper. But it really helped me to focus on who Jesus is during this time. I sat down and read the whole thing, and it really inspired me to think about the bigger picture, that the work of God supersedes anything and everything. It's bigger than the news cycle. And I needed that. I needed to be reminded that God's working in creation, that God's yearning to make things better, that God's striving to recreate this world, and that He uses us to be part of that. And so that was helpful for me to get me focused and looking in the right way and in the right direction. This is what Jesus is talking about. How much of your time is spent focusing on the right things? If we all do an honest assessment, what would it tell us? How much of our time is spent looking to God and the things of God? Or are we spending most of our time looking at things that will distract us and ultimately destroy us? That's what Jesus is holding up here. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? That we can take this darkness into ourselves. The animosity, the division, the anger, the hatred, the pessimism, all of that can be taken into who we are, and that can become who we are. So, very good words once again from Christ. 6:24, more good words and following. No one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. I don't know if there's a lot of explanation needed there. That's another get your priorities straight. Identify what matters most. A lot of us say, well, I want to go out and do this and this and this. Then once I am successful, once I am accomplished, then I'll pay attention to God. No, that's not how it works. God's supposed to be the number one priority in our lives. And then we align ourselves with that priority to make it happen. God is our primary. I just read a book about a Navy SEAL living with a guy to train him. It's a hilarious book, and it's really interesting. But so the guy's sitting there with SEAL, and that's what he calls him through the book to protect his identity. And he says, SEAL, if someone were to break into this house, if an intruder was to come into this house, what would you do? And SEAL just looked at him. And he said, no, I'm serious. What would you do? And he said, I would protect the primary. And he said, and the primary is your wife and your child. And I hate to tell you, but you're third on the list. But that kind of focus, right? I would protect the primary. What's the primary in your life? Do you have the focus on the mission? That the primary is what you are about. And that's what Jesus is holding up. Is the primary what you are about? Is the primary what I am about? And I would ask that question, and I'm posing that question not only to you and me, but we need to ask that question of our entire congregation. Is God the primary? Because if not, then we're off track. Is God the primary? So I'm going to encourage you to pray through that for yourself, pray that for me, and pray that for your church, that God be our primary objective always, so that we can stay on mission. So thank you for joining me today, and we'll keep on keeping on tomorrow. Thanks.